walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors, walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path, life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Waudia Seed, and I'm a plant walker, song keeper, word weaver, artisana, visual and performance artist, womb wisdom keeper, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the serpentine path where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together. Hello, everyone. This episode with my guest, Clementine Morrigan, is like a monster of an episode. And so I don't want to do too much of an intro, but this episode does require a few important notes that I want to touch on really quick. So Clementine recently celebrated the release of her book, Fucking Magic, which I actually have an original copy of the self-published version that she released, God, I don't know, 3-4 years ago maybe, I'm not sure. And it has been picked up by a really awesome and radical publishing house in Australia called Revolutionaries, and they are officially publishing it with her. So huge congratulations to Clementine. I will link the information in the show notes if you want to buy her book and support her work. Her writing is awesome. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on is that, later in this interview, you will hear Clementine mention another incredible writer named Andrea Gibson, who very recently passed away, I think within like the last week or two. And we recorded this episode before Andrea's passing, and when I was re-listening to this episode and editing it, and I heard Clementine mention Andrea's name and Andrea's work, it brought up a lot for me. Andrea was a hugely influential artist in my life, still is, of course, because their work ripples and echoes through the cosmos, through the collective. And one of the reasons that Andrea's work was so impactful is because Andrea spoke openly and honestly about their own experience of being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse in the way that Clementine also does in her writing. And these two writers are two of the only people that I know of who are openly and honestly and bravely speaking about their own experiences, and in doing so, opening the door for people like me to speak courageously as well. And I'm getting emotional and a little bit choked up because the work of these two people is so deeply felt in my heart. And so this episode is in part dedicated to the life of Andrea Gibson and for all of the beauty that they shared during their time on earth, praying that they made it to the other side with a lot of peace on their spirit. And this episode is also dedicated to anyone who has gone through similar experiences of any kind of sexual violence, but particularly those of us who carry the wounds of any kind of childhood sexual abuse know that so much of my work is in service to you. And so I hope that this episode offers you some sense of not being alone in your experience, some sense of hope and understanding that what happened to you does not define you and that it does not define what your future is going to be, that you always have the capacity to rewrite your story, to take back the narrative, to experience as much freedom and liberation and joy and pleasure in your body that you are possibly capable of, that coming back into right relationship with sex is your birthright, and that you absolutely can do it because there are people who are guiding that path that you can look to for orientation and for an example that it's possible. So this episode is for you. Now, without further ado, let's get into the interview with Clementine Morrigan. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Wadiasid. I'm your host, and it is an immense joy and pleasure to welcome this week's guest, Clementine Morrigan, to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's start with the question that I ask all of my guests, which is if your ancestors were here with us now, which of course they always are, how would they introduce you and what role would they say that you play in your family lineage?
It's an interesting question. I think I always really felt a block or a struggle around ancestor work because I'm an incest survivor and because I know I come from lineages of surviving incest. And so it was so easy for me to see almost like a hostility from my ancestors towards what I'm doing because I'm a cycle breaker. And it's sort of like in the context of this podcast, and the topic that we're going to get into today, talking about child sexual abuse and asking that question in that context, it actually allowed me to look at the question a little bit differently and to actually see a generations of sexually abused girls. Um, Not only girls, but in my family, it's patriarchal incest, and most of the victims, I think, have been women and girls. And so that was an interesting sort of reframe of just sort of connecting to the energy of all of these children who experience violence, and we're waiting for somebody to break the cycle. And so, yes, in my family, I'm the cycle breaker, and that also makes me the scapegoat. Um, and the work that I do, I'm a writer. Writing is my number one like expression of my calling. And writing for me is a spiritual practice, and it is a way in which I face things that I have been forbidden from acknowledging. And then I face them, I grapple with them, I transform them, and then I share that work with the world. And through that process, I also instigate sort of like a domino effect of transformation. And many of my readers are also in various processes of facing things that they have been forbidden from acknowledging. And so I would say that that is like the fundamental thrust of my work. And a lot of it is about childhood sexual abuse and the impacts of that, but not exclusively. But I feel like over and over again, the theme that I keep coming up to, that I keep reproducing, is this like insistence upon facing the things that we're not allowed to talk about. the things that there's a huge taboo around speaking about. I tend to do that over and over again. I speak about these things, and then people get really mad at me. And so in this way, like the experience of being scapegoated in my family for being the cycle breaker, it's also like reenacted at a larger scale, on like a cultural scale, where I am a scapegoat because people don't like cycle breakers and people really struggle with truth tellers. And that's what I do. So, yeah, I guess that's a good introduction to my work.
Yeah, thank you. And it is interesting when I was thinking about this episode because I always like to give context for how I know my guests and how I bring them on.
Mm,
And I have known your work for years at this point, and I found you through your writing. Like, I found you on Instagram. One of my friends sent me some of your writing and was like, I think that you would love this person's work. And your work has been incredibly supportive to me throughout so many phases of my own journey over the years. Probably, I don't know, probably at least 8 years that I've been familiar with your work. And what I will say is that I think that you are literally the first person that I ever saw speaking openly about childhood sexual abuse way early on and in a really, really fucking brave way. In a way that was like, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to look at this openly and boldly. And I know that for myself, when I was going through my really, really deep process of having to heal all of this and no longer ignoring it and pretending it didn't happen and pretending that it didn't have really serious long-term impacts on me, on my health, on my relationships, on my dynamic with my family, all of it. I remember being like, I have to talk about this. I have to share this because I know I'm not alone in this. And I remember there were so many instances, because I'm also a writer, and there were so many instances where I was like, I have to find the avenue to do this, but I don't see anyone doing this. And you were the one person who I came back to time and time again, where I was like, okay, if she can do it, I can do it. And so that's just
mm,
to say that like your work has deeply impacted me, and I'm incredibly grateful that you took the time to come to onto this podcast and share about this because I've also shared about it in a lot of previous episodes. I'm very open about it at this point. And you're one of the few people that has actually offered an example of like it is possible to like break those cycles of shame in the throat and also like in the cervix, in the womb, in the vagina, like in the female reproductive system as well, and like find your freedom again. And I totally relate to, looking at my own history of this and understanding that any kind of childhood sexual abuse, incest, any of these topics are not just something that happens, generally speaking, in like one generation, right? It's something that is like deeply seated and interwoven and contorts an entire family line. And there's so much shame and there's so much secrecy and there's so much fear. And then you see it expressed in like a plethora of dysfunction within first a family line, but then also just in our culture in general, like in the collective. So I totally get the Psycho Baker conundrum, right? It's like there's a part of you that's like, I have to speak. Like, if I don't speak, I will die. And also, yeah, trying to find those ways in which to share your voice that feels authentic and honest and also protective for you, protective for your experience. Like, I'm totally in the same boat of, always trying to figure that out. Yeah, I'd love for you to just give listeners who maybe aren't familiar with like you, your path, all of the incredible things that you do in the world, take the space that you would like to kind of share about what you orient to.
So I'm a leftist. I am political in the sense that I think right now, under capitalism, we are living under a system that is hostile to everything sacred and everything good, and that is literally destroying the planet. And so I really want us to move towards political systems that can actually put limits on this never-ending growth that is leading us to extinction crisis, that can actually put a cap on billionaires' behavior, which is, ecocidal behavior. And so in that political vision of ending capitalism, which is ultimately like my long-term dream and goal and vision that everything is pointing towards, if we want to have, a future of life on Earth, we have to really prioritize this. And so in getting there, a lot of my focus is upon building solidarity in the working class, finding ways for people in the working class to come together and build power together. And in particular, finding ways to work together across difference. So a lot of my political work challenges dysfunctional behaviors on the left, where we cancel each other, where we are harshly critical of each other, where we're constantly exiling people, where we completely refused to work with people who we may have some political disagreements with, right? Like all of this stuff is preventing us from actually accessing the one power that we have as working people, which is our numbers, right? Like the rich people, they fucking own everything and they own the governments and they own the militaries and they own the police. Like they have all the like hard power, right? And we are sort of like, how are we supposed to live and struggle against these huge, enormous forces? And we feel so powerless against it. And this is how a lot of the scapegoating takes place because on the left, like there's a similar scapegoating thing that happens where because we cannot actually attack the real source of our suffering, we attack each other and we cancel people as a symbolic catharsis to feel like we actually have some power. And in doing so, we undermine our actual power, which would be our solidarity. And so all of my work is sort of like situated in this larger project of trying to mobilize the left, trying to get people politicized, trying to get people of all different sorts, like working together towards a goal of saving life on Earth from capitalism. Um, and then beyond that, like I think that I have a very strong protective energy around those who are stripped of their personhood, whoever that may be. And so a lot of my work is about coming to the defense of those who are being stripped of their personhood and treated as objects, treated as disposable. And this does not only extend to human beings, like I also have a huge struggle and fight in me for animals, particularly the billions of animals that are trapped inside animal agriculture right now and being tortured. Like I see that as part of the same struggle. And like all of this, I think really does flow out of, for me, my embodied experience as a survivor. Because as a child, when I was coming up against the annihilating power of the family, when I was coming up against the fact that I had no rights of my own as a child and that I was completely at the mercy of my family, and that my family wasn't even in reality, and of course as a child like I could only conceptualize this in a very fractured way because that is such a terrifying reality to face that I could not fully conceptualize it, but I did obviously know on some level that that was what was happening, um because my body told me. That feeling of extreme abject helplessness and powerlessness is the thing that causes me to orient towards justice and towards the defense of those who are being made to be helpless. And so, like solidarity with Palestinians who are experiencing genocide right now, solidarity with everyone who is being subjected to the forces of imperialism and capitalism and stripping them of their specificity, and their right to live and to be free of torture and suffering. And so that is my like larger vision, is like defend the dignity of all living beings. Um, and create an effective left that has the power to sort of enforce that and make that real. And so that's my political vision. And then like artistically, creatively, like I'm an independent writer that comes out of the tradition of zines. And so I've been writing and publishing zines since I was literally 13 years old, since I was that survivor trapped inside the family. I started to find my voice through writing and publishing through zines. And so that's a really big part of both my political and artistic vision, is this idea that we can speak and we can take part now. We don't have to wait until we are smarter, better, less crazy. We have more money, more power, more education, until people think we're cool or whatever the fuck it is. We don't have to wait until we are some kind of perfect version of ourselves. We have something to offer now. And so like that sort of like anti-perfectionism is like fundamental to my work, and it's what allows me to be so prolific and I have been doing this work and publishing, through all iterations of my life. And there's people that I know who will be like, oh, like I don't want to publish because when I look back at things I wrote, like I feel so cringe. And to me, I'm like, you have to fucking face that cringe. You have to deal with that cringe because otherwise you will not produce work and you are therefore stealing your gifts from the world. Like that's the way that I see it. I am here with something to offer and it's my responsibility to offer that. That's not like an ego thing. That's a responsibility thing. And I think that we all have that responsibility. Like we all have gifts. And right now we're in a moment where the world really needs our gifts. And so we should be showing up with that to the best of our ability, and not worrying so much about, the haters and what people are going to think or if nobody's going to like it. Like if you come from the heart and you keep doing your work, you're going to find the people that resonate. And so I'm really passionate about that and about not only doing my own work that way, but also encouraging others to step into their creative and intellectual power and responsibility so that they don't just have to be passive consumers and can actually take part in trying to come up with some solutions for the great many problems that we face. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but I feel like that's a good summary of my worldview.
Yeah, awesome and so badass. And people obviously can't see me, but I'm just smiling because it's so true. Like what I was just thinking about towards the end of what you were speaking to is that I feel so much of your artistic work and what you were just speaking on of just like, just keep going, just do it, just offer your gifts. Like, who cares? Truly, who cares? Who cares if people hate it? Who cares if people love it? Like, that actually is the practice of offering your gifts. And the same thing of that kind of staying power with the artistic practice needs to be then applied to any of our like political work that we're doing, any of the community work that we're doing, any of our dharmic path, whatever version that you want to take. How you find the staying power is really just keep going. You just
Yeah.
keep doing, you just keep producing, you keep creating. If something fails, I'm saying that in air quotes, like there's no such thing because you learned something, you used your voice. And I also think that there is something to be said about the importance of allowing the world to witness you grow
Mm.
and evolve and transform and to be a different person in 1 year's time, in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time, and not to curate some like frozen in time version of you that is perfect. I feel like that is such it's such a version of like what we would call like white supremacist culture or what we would call like capitalist vision of like produce something that is incredible and that will sell a lot of money every time, like just being in that process. And then I would also say like your podcast that you have with your partner
Mm.
Jay, the fucking
Right.
cancer podcast, one of my favorite podcasts, and I found it at the time when I was really coming out a lot, out of a lot of my own questioning of any of the political work that I was doing and the community organizing work that I was doing when I was living in New York City. There just got to be a point where I was like, I don't like this. I don't like this feeling. I don't like constantly feeling like I'm censoring myself. I don't like feeling pressure that I have to post about something. I don't like feeling that I have to speak on something. I don't like policing other people. Like, is this what I'm on earth to do? And I really had this hard moment where I was just kind of like, ugh, like I don't even want to be politically involved at all. And then I found your podcast through your writing. Like you guys started a podcast, and I was like, oh, hell yeah. And it was so refreshing because it did force me to start understanding like the solidarity amongst working class people is the work. That's actually the only important thing that I want to be doing in my life. And I don't want to be at the dinner table, like fighting with my uncle who has different political views. Like, I actually want to be interweaving our commonalities. And I would say, too, like spending so much time living in Latin America where people have really different perspectives about gender, people have really different perspectives about religion and what is right and correct. And there was, me coming from New York City and being in this like totally queer leftist space and like that being my world for so long and then being put in a really different
Mm.
place and being like, wow, but this is my community. Like these are the people that I'm around and I need to find a way to really find common unity among us. And so am I going to like fight with them or am I going to find something that we can create together? And your podcast was like extremely pivotal in that shift for me. It also
Mm.
just started to feel more useful, like so much more interesting to be in that generative process than in the like tearing down. And so yeah, I love your guys' podcast. Everyone should go listen to it. It's awesome. All right, cool. Well, let's get into the meat of this
Mhm.
conversation. Yeah, I guess I'll just give you a little bit of space first to speak on your experience of being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and incest, and what you feel you can pinpoint in yourself have been like the long-term impacts in terms of, your relationship to your body and sexuality, your relationship to safety, your relationship to men, I would say in particular, your health, your spirituality, any of the kind of big topics that you want to touch on.
Yeah, so my family is a family with patriarchal incest. This is the way that I have come to speak about it. In my thinking about like in coming to understand what happened to me, I've basically like developed my own theories about incest and how it works because there was so little out there that actually explains these dynamics, right? And I have very strong feelings about how incest works, and it works in a bunch of different ways. It's not always the same. Like patriarchal incest is kind of one type of incest. There's different kinds. But I mm, I think that in my childhood, I think for many survivors in our childhoods, what happened was so normalized and was so considered normal that it was really hard for me. Like on the one level, my body experienced extreme terror. And then on the other hand, like my family was acting like nothing was actually happening, right? And so in my writing about this, I've called it the realm of unreality. And I want to be really clear when I'm talking about this. I think one of the issues with talking about childhood sexual abuse is that we are chronically unclear when we are talking about it. We use language that is very unclear and unspecific. And so what ends up happening is that many, many survivors do not actually realize that what happened to them counts as sexual abuse because the language around sexual abuse is way too fucking vague. People will talk about molestation a lot, and it's unclear what that fucking means specifically, you know? And many survivors have been taught through their abusive families that what happened to them is not that bad and does not count. And so in my family, what was actually going on I would now call like a type of sexual terrorism in which I was chronically under the threat of rape in my childhood. I have only recently just come to really name it like that because my family would never, ever, ever acknowledge that this is the terror that I lived under. But the context is that my grandfather was constantly making sexual comments, constantly playing sexual games in air quotes, um, in which, he would make sexual advances towards the children, constantly like saying he wanted to make out with us or he wanted to marry us, the girls. Um, and also playing a game that was called Slippery Slobberies, where he would grab us and forcibly hold us and lick our faces while we tried to escape. In my family, this was considered a harmless game, and we were punished by our father for trying to resist. And so this is also, another thing that I've come to understand about incest is that incest is not a discrete dynamic between a perpetrator and a victim. Incest is a family dynamic that usually includes every single member of that family in the incest in some way, right? And so all children in an incestuous or sexually abusive family are victims, regardless of whether or not they are the ones being targeted for sexual abuse. They are in an incestuous family, and that is sexual abuse. All of the adults are perpetrators, even if they are not the ones who are enacting the sexual abuse, because they are facilitating it in various ways. The only responsible choice, if a child is being sexually abused and you know about it, is to remove the child from the sexual abuser. Any adult who fails to do that is facilitating the sexual abuse. And so, like you said, like relationship with men is probably more impacted due to the fact that I'm a survivor of patriarchal incest. But in fact, my mother's role in this was actually hugely traumatic. And it's only been later in my recovery process that I have started to grapple with the impact of my mother's not only inaction, but her allowance of all of this and the work that she has done to repress my speech about the sexual abuse that I have survived. And so in my family, that type of very normalized behavior that I was chronically experiencing from my grandfather, and then also having my father force me to do it, my father was facilitating it. He was like, I would have never have allowed my grandfather to do that if it wasn't for my father, because I had an attachment relationship to my father, whereas I didn't have an attachment relationship to my grandfather. So it was my desperate desire to be good and to be loved by my father that allowed me to actually repress the fight response, repress the disgust, repress everything in my body that was saying, this is a real danger, this is a real threat, and walk into my grandfather's arms. And so when I was 12, he escalated when he cornered me in a bathroom and he forced his tongue into my mouth and made out with me with his tongue. This is the quote worst thing that happened if we understand things as sort of more serious when they become like more physical, right? Which is actually not how trauma works. And it took me a really long time to understand that all of the other stuff that happened was sexual abuse. And in fact, all of the times that he licked my face was sexual assault. One of the things like my family will say now, because it's finally gotten to a point where they will acknowledge that that one time when he forced his tongue into my mouth was a sexual assault, but they'll say, oh, you were sexually assaulted one time, you know? And it took me so long to be like, no, if I walked out of my house and grabbed a stranger on the street and forcibly held them while I licked their face, I would probably be charged with a sexual assault, let alone if I did that to a child, you know? You're not allowed to do any kind of sexual behavior to someone that doesn't want it. And that includes kissing, licking, touching of any kind. So, of course, those were all sexual assaults. And it just shows like how fucked up our culture is that we even have to like defend that. It so obviously is. But the brainwashing was so fucking intense that like I literally only realized within the past year that all of those other times were sexual assaults too, right? And then it's not just that, but it's the chronic fear that you feel when a family member is expressing sexual interest in you. It is like impossible to describe what that chronic terror does to your body, right? So, you know, I in the general narrative of like what counts as sexual abuse, what happened to me was not that bad in quotations, right? And I really want to emphasize that because I think that so many people have had experiences like this and they're so fucked up and they're so traumatized and the impact is so pervasive on their bodies and on their lives, but they don't believe that what happened was bad enough for that to have caused that. And I'm telling you that it is. And I think that there's a lot of people who even believe that they may have repressed memories of something more serious because they don't think that what happened to them was enough to have produced the trauma that they have. And to me, this actually just shows how normalized sexual abusive behavior is in our culture, that so many sexually abusive behaviors don't count. And that it only is crossing the line when what? Like when a specific kind of sexual assault happens. And I have friends who have experienced, you know, child sexual abuse that included child rape. And it's obvious that even as the more intense sexual assaults um, happen, the line about what counts as incest is always further receding into the distance, right? Nothing ever counts. Like the perpetrator can always find a way of saying that what they are doing does not count and is not real. So it doesn't actually matter how, quote, serious it is. The perpetrator is not going to own it no matter what. And so many of these other behaviors are serious and we're just not taking them seriously. And so, in terms of the impact, I mean, this impacted every single area of my life in every possible way. I'm lucky to be alive. What happened to me, like after that, not only the chronic sexual abuse, the chronic terror that I had to live with, the violation of my most sacred boundaries, but the fact that my entire family, including my mother, who is a feminist scholar of motherhood, acted as if this was completely normal behavior. And as I got older and started to do the behaviors that survivors often do, which are protest behaviors, which are survival behaviors, that are sounding an alarm that something is seriously wrong, I started to be treated as difficult, bad, and crazy. And so during my teenage years, I went crazy. I started cutting myself. I started having breakdowns at school, like hyperventilating. And I was incarcerated in psychiatric facilities for this. And no one could really put the pieces together. Like I actually, because I caught myself, I was brought into the guidance counselor who I was forced to see because I was cutting myself. And then eventually I disclosed to her, like, I told her I was stressed about seeing my grandfather. And she was like, why? And I just told her this in the most casual way because I had told so many adults before. Like, I did not think that I was disclosing sexual abuse. I was disclosing what was going on in my family that my parents had assured me was very normal, and that if I had a problem with it, I was very ungrateful and bad. And the guidance counselor called Children's Aid and the police, and I was taken from my high school to a police station where I told them what was going on, and I was assured that it was in fact sexual assault when he forcibly made out with me when I was 12. And then I was just dropped off at home and left with my family, and then the police never contacted me again. Um, and so I know it's fucking insane. And so I ended up dropping out of high school. I moved to Toronto. I moved away from my hometown into the city when I was a teenager. And my mother basically gave me money to pay my rent, but like let me sort of get out of the house because honestly, I was being so crazy. And then from there, I became an insane alcoholic who was just in constant high risk situations for basically 9 years. Like from when I was about 16 till when I was 25, which is when I got sober, I was chronically in a situation of poverty, violence, chaos, addiction, and therefore a repetitive cycle of trauma. And so I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I ended up in a relationship with someone who is also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, who reenacted the cycle by horribly abusing me. And so it took me until I was 24 to start seeking non-psychiatric help because of the fact that I'd been psychiatrized. I was terrified of accessing help of any kind because I was afraid they were going to incarcerate me, which is the worst thing that you should do to an incest survivor, because we have never had bodily autonomy and freedom. And so locking us away is absolutely violent, especially when you're locking us away for expressing the trauma of the sexual abuse. Um, so when I finally got non-psychiatric help, I went on this journey of healing that I have now been on. I'm 38 now. I've been on this journey for a long fucking time. And yes, on top of all of that, yes, it's affected every area of my life. So I have disorganized attachment. It's like I have had to work so fucking hard to have close, trusting relationships with people. I still have to work hard on this. Like it's definitely not totally resolved, although I do have close, important, trustworthy relationships. I still do the thing where I chronically long for connection while simultaneously giving out the vibe that I don't want people to come near me. So I have like a chronic outsider like feeling in my life. I had so many issues with my sexuality, like compulsive sexuality when I was young, where I was just having sex with men constantly, like reenacting my trauma. And then periods of like absolutely no sexuality at all, no feeling at all, chronic numbness and inability to like feel sensation in my body for years and years and years and years and years. I could not feel my body. Um, and then, of course, I have autoimmunity. I have two autoimmune conditions, one of which specifically affects my vulva, called lichen sclerosis. And so it's just so fucking obvious that sexual abuse just did such a fucking number on me. And yet, again, I want to emphasize that what happened to me, according to a lot of people, or according to my parents, or according to the larger culture that wants to normalize the sexual abuse of children, it wasn't that bad, right? And I'm like, if you can get that fucked up from this, like, I mean, think about how many people are carrying this type of trauma. And it's really hard to heal from trauma when that trauma is chronically invalidated by the larger culture. Like, you actually have to reach a place where you can accept that actually, yes, what happened to me really was that bad. And I have finally reached that place, thank God. Now I'm like, this is insane that I even have to argue that children should never have to live in sexual fear of their family members. Like there is no comment, game, anything where you're sexualizing a child that is ever acceptable or appropriate or not traumatic. And so I'm on a big mission in terms of like broadening our understanding of what incest is and validating the trauma of incest survivors who may not have actually had any contact, any physical contact in the sexual abuse that they experienced. But, overly enmeshed emotional boundaries with a parent, totally like lack of privacy, sexual control and obsession over your body, what you're wearing. Like there are many different ways that incest can play out in a family that don't necessarily include a physical sexual assault. And if it was only a physical sexual assault that counted and that mattered, what that would mean is that all my trauma supposedly comes from the one time that he put his tongue in my mouth. Like, this is obviously not true. I was severely traumatized already when he did that. That was when I was 12. So I'm like, if he had not done that, like that's like the one thing that for my family at least, they're like, that's what makes it real, is that that one thing was a sexual assault. But I'm like, obviously all the rest of it was too and was super traumatic. So big answer to a big question, but I think that covered it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing everything that you moved through. And I can relate in so many ways because I also went through such a hard process of coming to terms with the fact of the things that I thought that were not that bad that happened to me, but then looking at the long-term impacts that it had on my life. And I was like, there's no way that it couldn't have been that bad. And I remember, really just questioning it so deeply, like, am I crazy? Am I making stuff up? Like, am I just fucked up and over exaggerating? Do I just want attention? Like the constant doubt in my mind. And then you're also dealing with memories that are decades old at a certain point. And it's so hard to speak to people about, like, I remember this feeling in my body. Like I still hold this feeling in my body. Like I know that something happened. And I can't necessarily say if it was outright what we would consider rape or if it was just the terror, like what you were saying, that sexual
Mhm.
terrorism. And I remember, like, to my mother's credit, I had a music teacher who was on that vibe for a long time. And like I couldn't name it. You know what I mean? I couldn't name it and like something was up, but there was never like any overt thing that happened for a while until eventually that music teacher, I saw him kissing one of his students, a young boy, in front of me. And I actually didn't tell my mom about it because I was so shocked. I was like, what is happening? Like, this is my music teacher. Like, this is with a little boy. I'm a little girl. Maybe it's different. Like, I was so confused at the time. I think it was only like 11. And I actually didn't say anything. I didn't tell my mom. And to my mom's credit, at like the music recital, my mother saw him kissing the boy, and she immediately went to the boy's grandmother and was like, "Yo, what the fuck?" Because the grandma had recommended the music teacher to us.
Right.
And so to my mom's credit, like she was like, "What in the actual fuck?" And she told him, and she immediately fired him. Like she took the piano out of the basement. That was done. So thank God that my mom did protect us in that way. But there have been other instances in my family, not my nuclear family, but kind of extended family, where there was a lot of sexual abuse occurring, where parents knew.
Yeah.
Parents, like with the priest or with this grandfather or even with grandmothers or with older siblings, stuff like that, and things were not um addressed and children were not protected. And so when you're speaking to this whole thing of like when one child in the family is experiencing any kind of sexual abuse, either within the family or outside of the family, because there were other things that happened to me outside of the family that my parents did not know about. Um, that when I was able to go back and see my 6-year-old body and what happened to me, and then to zoom out and see how that impacted the entire family system and how it impacted my relationship with my sisters, how it impacted my relationship with my parents, like all of it, I just realized, wow, like it's not just it's not just my story, actually. Like it is the whole family thing. And then the immense pain of having to talk to your family about that and their own questions and their own doubts. And it's so uncomfortable to look at. Like the idea of like a child being sexually abused is so horrible, just horrible, you know? And then as a parent, to have to go through that and what you sit with, like it's fucking hard. And to my parents' credit, they have absolutely done the best that they can. And I'm so grateful for them. But I think more often than not, people have the experience that you have had, which is parents who totally cannot, yeah, sit with those subtleties of what is actually going on. And what I would say is like what I saw in so many ceremonies when I was living in the jungle, is that when a child feels that distortion of their purity and their innocence and their sacred boundaries, and what they're supposed to experience is just like safety of all adults that they are around, because it, especially like in the jungle in an indigenous context, like every child is every adult's responsibility, right? They have these extended kinship systems. And so when a child feels that sexual distortion from an adult, even if something doesn't happen physically,
Yeah.
just the energy of it sends that child's nervous system into like hyper overdrive fear. And children are never, ever, ever supposed to experience that. I mean, a huge majority of children do. But in an ideal world, like kids would not have to be scared of being alone with a certain adult because they feel that energy in the back of the mind that there is something here that like I'm not safe with. Like I'm supposed to be able to protect or
Yeah.
to trust adults, right? And then from my own story, yeah, I mean, when I look at like the hyper sexualization that I experienced throughout my like late teen years, early 20s, mid 20s, all of the re-victimization really was what it was at the end of the day, just re-victimizing myself because I couldn't figure it out. And I feel like my body was trying to create stories where I could maybe like feel, what's the word? Like feel like I was in control of the abuse, you know, or that I was choosing the situation or whatever. That's a very common theme with survivors. Totally dealt with like a lot of substance abuse and issues like that, a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs, a lot of different paths, and then so much like illness in my reproductive organs, right? Like chronic vaginal infections for over a decade, or yeah, like almost a decade. Ones where I almost lost my fertility, right? Like really serious pain with sex, like just like horrible menstrual cramps, like everything under the sun. And it wasn't until I finally got to the root of it, which was that I had been molested as a 6 year old. I was like, oh, fuck, that's what it is. And all of my health issues went away. I don't have any kind of reproductive vaginal health issues at this point in time. But I was able to track it. Like everything in my life that was fucked up, like, boom, I could distill it down to that moment as a 6 year old where that sense of like my purity, my innocence, my sacredness, my safety was like ripped from me. And you can't go back. You cannot go back from that. There is no returning to before. And yeah, sorry. It's a hard thing to talk about even now, even years later after all the work I've done. It's
Mm,
you know,
mhm.
something that I feel like people don't understand a lot of the time, which I'm sure you can speak to, is like when we look at people who are struggling with addiction, when we look at people who are struggling with any kind of psychiatric issues a lot of the time, when we look at people who often end up in the sex industry, the commonality, like 95 to 99% of the time, is that these are people who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
Yes, and homelessness too.
Oh, yeah, duh, for sure. And it's so easy to look at the adult version of that person and be like, oh, they're a junkie. Oh, they're a whore. Oh, they're, just like homeless on the street, begging, whatever. And not being able to actually see the child in them. And so, yeah, I don't know. Do you want to speak on that a little bit? I mean, I know you have a lot more experience having been in, I don't know if you're still in Alcoholics Anonymous or,
I'm not still in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I was for like 11 years or something.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, okay, yes. Yes, addicts are using substances because they are in pain. That is why. Um, and people need to use substances because they are in so much pain. Um, Also because the action of using a substance to deal with your pain is an action of agency. It's a feeling that you do have some power when you have felt so powerless. And it is a way to actually take back some control over the feelings and sensations that you will feel in your body. And so it is absolutely normal um, for um, for survivors of child abuse in general, including child sexual abuse, but also like physical abuse, neglect, other types of child abuse, to use substances and also to use them in chaotic and extreme ways. And I was a fucking insane alcoholic. I really just wanted to take as much alcohol into my body as physically possible. As soon as I drank alcohol for the first time, I felt absolute relief in my body, like for the first time in my life. I had not felt like how extreme the distress I was constantly feeling in my body was until I actually, and before I was drinking, I was cutting and that's how I was managing it. But to drink was like, holy fuck, like I just felt it go. And also, hilariously, alcohol, because in my family, like I have a very strong fight response, a very strong fight response. But that was obviously deeply punished and deeply crushed in my family. And I was encouraged into like a freeze fawn response. And I didn't really talk about this, and it's kind of a lot to explain. Maybe we can get into it. But I have really intense structural dissociation due to the trauma I experienced. And I didn't mention that as part of the effects. But like literally, I have a split personality. I don't have amnesia between the two different parts, but like I have very different strategies for survival that basically had to split away from each other because it was impossible to hold it together, right? And so there is a part of me that has like a very intense fawn freeze response, and that was the part of me that had to learn how to maintain attachment with my parents, even though I was being abused. But then there's another part of me that was deeply repressed that has an extreme fight response and just like all that repressed anger and all of that repressed desire to fight back. When I drank, like that part would just go crazy and would come out of me in the craziest ways. So I was like a really aggressive, really antisocial drunk, and I would just scream at people. And I really see when you see those like messy drunks who are just melting down, especially women who do that. I'm like, this is such a fucking like expression of that trauma, and a need to say it. And so alcohol did a lot for me. And I got sober when I was 25. I went to AA. And like, I am not exaggerating that the path that I was on, I very likely would have died pretty soon because I kept having really intense things happen, like not only physical assaults, but like accidents, right? When you're that drunk, like I would fall and get concussions all the time. And like I was always in dangerous situations all the time. So sometimes people like that live for a while and sometimes they die young. And I was definitely in that kind of a situation. And then I got sober through AA. And like I will say that AA profoundly saved my life because what it offered me was community. And so when I was a person who was extremely alone and who was treated as garbage by society because I was so crazy and so visibly fucked up, that I was not able, I did not have the skills to build relationships. I had not met the developmental milestones. I mean, beyond the sexual abuse of my family was also severely emotionally neglectful. So many things I just did not learn about how to have relationships, how to be in the world. And then on top of that, I'm all crazy. So of course people don't want to be near me. And AA was this space where people were kind and welcoming and just like come back, keep coming back. They'd give me coffee and cookies. They would welcome me no matter how fucked up I was. And that's how I had friends for the first time in my life, community for the first time in my life. And it really did save my life and it really was super important to me. And at a certain point, I started to get frustrated by the total lack of trauma analysis or a trauma lens on addiction. And I got tired of sitting in a room, like in AA, there's often a format where people will go up and tell their story, right? So like what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. So people will share like about their using or drinking, how they got sober, and like what things are like today. And so many times, I would hear this same exact thing where someone would get up there and be like, yeah, so this is what happened in my childhood, and they would be like, I wasn't loved. Like I was like chronically seeking affection from my parents and couldn't receive it. I was abused. Like my father was an alcoholic. Like there was sexual abuse from an older cousin, whatever. There are all these different stories that have one thing in common. childhood trauma. And then the person would be like, but that didn't make me an alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic is just, and it's sort of like the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was written in the 1930s when people did not fully understand what was going on. And like, I think there's a lot of truth to it. I do think that there is an element of addiction that can be understood as a spiritual malady in the sense that we're deeply alienated from connections of all kinds, including connections to systems of meaning, connection to something bigger than ourselves, because like our entire world was rocked by trauma, right? Of course, we feel alienated from everything and from life itself. So, of course, a spiritual solution is going to be helpful to many addicts and alcoholics. But it's not enough if we don't actually look at and grapple with the trauma that so many people are actually, that's the reason why they are addicts. And what ends up happening is that people can get sober from drugs and alcohol and get, clapped for. Um, and then that can feel like a success, but then they're just acting out their trauma in other ways, in other more socially acceptable addictions. They're finding other ways to soothe because they're not actually dealing with the underlying thing that is so painful. And like this is a bit complex of a point, but I want to make it. I want to try to express this. As I said, I have a split personality. I have a split personality. And it can basically be understood as like the good daughter and the bad daughter, right? And the good daughter chose to repress my boundaries to save my relationship with my parents to be good. And the bad daughter chose to go fucking crazy to like be like, something is wrong, something is wrong, something is wrong, and always acted in ways that seemed really fucking crazy, which is often the smartest thing that a traumatized person experiencing violence can do, right? And so what I was realizing is that in AA, I was actually reenacting this dynamic where people were clapping for the good daughter, right? Everybody was so happy about the part of me that was being good, right? The part of me that was not doing drugs and alcohol, the part of me that was like showing up to meetings, being good. And in this way, I started to take part in the scapegoating process of my bad daughter part, the part of me that was crazy. And for so many years, I felt like shame and rejection towards that part of myself. And so I had to go through this big trauma journey where I actually realized, no, I do not abandon that part of myself. She saved my fucking life and I owe her everything. And all that crazy behavior was the absolute smartest decision that she could have made. I would not have been here if she had not done that because I needed to get out of the crazy making of my family, like being totally like brainwashed into believing their worldview would have been so much worse. And the only power strong enough to get me out of that was to be completely crazy. So I needed to value that part of myself. And now I do. Like I hold her like as a very important part of who I am. And like both strategies, they need to be integrated, because they were both different ways that I was trying to survive. And so in my journey, what ended up happening is that I was almost like a bit fundamentalist about AA, okay, as some people get. So I was like very obsessed because I was in a system of rigid control. Like I was like my life was so chaotic before. This is the thing that saved me. This is the thing that made my life so much better. And so therefore I have to be like religious about it. I have to be so like adhere to it so strictly because any slip up could send me back into chaos, right? So like I wouldn't drink kombucha, because it has like a tiny bit of alcohol in it. Like I was very, very rigid. I was always sponsoring tons of people. I was super judgmental of people who had a different path, right? Like if people talked about using substances, I was always like, no, 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 no. Like this is dangerous. We can't be hearing this because what if I just start relapsing? And as you said, it's cool to be able to change in public and to be honest about these different iterations of ourselves because I'm super not like this anymore. But what ended up happening is that I have very fucking sticky, very fucking treatment resistant complex developmental trauma, okay? Because it isn't just the experiences that I had, which were many, right? My childhood and then also like the whole period of my early 20s, late teens. Like just the amount of violence I've experienced is really staggering. But it's also just like the profound and repeated relational wound of not being protected. This is such a huge trauma and it is so sticky. It affects me in all areas. And like, so after like, I don't know, 10 years of AA, 11 years of therapy every week, just working so hard on this all the time, trying fucking everything. I was still in a position where I was pretty physically numb. I could not enjoy a lot of sexual acts because I couldn't feel them. Um, I was so closed off. I like desperately longed for connection with people. I desperately longed for like deep, intimate relationships, and I could barely have them. I kept pushing away what I wanted, and no, and I couldn't figure it out, and so I was always seeking like something else to help me to break through these blocks that were so sticky. And of course, I'm reading all the research about trauma and trauma recovery and trying to understand this. And so, of course, I started to come across psychedelics. And psychedelics in the research, they're like, this is the new frontier of trauma recovery. Like, plant medicines have been shown to give people experiences that can actually be super corrective to the trauma that they had and can actually affect things on a much deeper level than a lot of therapies can. And so I came to this reckoning with myself where my desire for true freedom, my desire to really be able to be who I am to the fullest extent, which is, my life goal as someone who's had this much taken from me. I want to take as much back as I possibly can, right? And so that's so important. But then the cost, if I were to pursue this, would be to lose my good girl status in AA, right? I would no longer be the good girl. I would no longer be the good daughter. I would no longer be the good AAer who everybody claps for. I would become one of the bad ones who go out, And like, I can't even explain how intense this was because my entire world was AA, right? Like, all my friends, all my relationships was AA for like a decade. So to actually do this, something that I had been super judgmental of other people, and that many people were judgmental of around me, I knew it was like a crazy thing to do and like would be very earth-shattering. But I was already in this process of starting to understand how I was outgrowing a lot of what was working for me in AA, and I was seeking something more, something else, while still being super grateful for everything that AA gave me, and I learned a lot from them. It's still very influential on me, but I was moving on. And so, yeah, I did, and I did ayahuasca ceremony, and this is the most effective thing that I have ever done for my trauma, and completely shifted these sticky things. Like, not to say, wow, I'm all cured, like, there's definitely still more work to do, but like the numbness and my capacity to receive sensation and intimacy hugely and drastically and noticeably improved after ayahuasca. And so all of this together just really gave me a different way of looking at things. I realized that no one framework, no one system, no one group, no one anything is the answer. The answer is for me to be in alignment with my truth, my agency, and to advocate for what I want and need, and to choose my recovery path myself because that agency is the very thing that has been stolen from me, right? So any kind of system, any recovery model that is going to position itself as an authority over my body is not good for me. I am the authority over my body. I make those decisions. And so I choose if I want to do ayahuasca or not. And so, yeah, that's very long-winded, but I have definitely, the addiction thing is a huge part of my story.
Yeah, thank you. And it is really interesting because, my listeners know I have a very deep path with the medicine of ayahuasca, more the Colombian brew of yahe. I mean, I've been walking with that plant now for 4 years. I lived in the jungle for full time for a year and a half with my elders, with my teachers. And yeah, like I cannot downplay or like the reality is I also would not be alive had I not found that plant. Really, really seriously, the path that I was on I guess I found the plant when I was 24 and I'm almost 29 now. And seriously, that plant taught me how to save my own life.
Mm,
And I think it's really important to touch on what you just said at the end, which is like any system of healing, any modality, any teaching, like there's always going to be deep medicine in it. And also, there is no one thing that will heal you. You know, I can say I tried years of therapy. I did tons of meditation, yoga. I never took any kind of pharmaceutical like antipsychotics, antidepressants, anxiety, even though I really should have probably because I was like so fucked up for a long time living in New York City. It might have benefited me actually at that moment. Um, but like, yeah, working with Yehe, working with ayahuasca was the thing that like brought me to the root of everything time and time again. And more than anything, it brought like the physical sensations, like it literally shook it out of my body. Like I remember probably the first 30 ceremonies that I ever did, my body would just be in my hammock, like convulsing, shaking. And I remember in the beginning just being terrified because I was like, I'm not cold. Why am I like shivering? And what I finally came to realize, what the plant was showing me in ceremony through visions and through just like deep intuitive knowing, is that I was shaking off all the fucking violence, all of the trauma, all of the distortion, all of the like lack of safety that I had been encoded into my cells, but not just from like my lived experience, but so many generations behind that I had embodied. And I'd just be in ceremony, just shaking, 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 shaking for probably literally the first 30 ceremonies. And it finally did get to a point where like my body started feeling more at peace. Finally, after just purging my guts out and puking and shitting all over the jungle and just going through it, right? And I had so many people after that period of time see me and be like, you're literally a different person. Like the person who went into the jungle versus the person who came out, like you look different, like you look light. Your heart is finally open, like you're softer. That was like the first thing that people always said when I
Mm.
came back from the jungle the first time. Everyone in New York City was like, you're so soft. Like, how did that happen? I saw you 2 weeks ago and you came back and you're so soft in this way. And it's been years of me understanding the amount of armor that I built up around myself because I didn't feel safe and how tough I had to make myself. You know, I had like flaming red hair, got a bunch of tattoos and piercings. Like, I just wanted people to know they couldn't fuck with me, that like I could protect myself. I'm a warrior. I'm a badass. Like, you know, basically, don't rape me again was like
Mhm.
what I was trying to scream to the world. And then that whole process of my work with the plant was just this softening in my heart, softening in my body, certainly softening in my womb space, in my vagina, with my sexuality, with my sensuality, with my femininity. All of that finally just got to this point where I was like, okay. And that's not to say that I don't still have stuff that come up. I think that that's the hard thing, is that I don't think that there's any like full 100%, I'm totally healed. This is never going to impact me ever again. It's something that I walk with for my whole life. And that's an intense thing to just have to sit with in yourself of be like, even with everything that I've done, there's still shit here. And you know, how do we make peace with that? How do we just accept that, like, okay, this is like the Earth school curriculum that I apparently got when I came into this lifetime? And what am I going to do to just bring myself more freedom in my body, more pleasure, more joy, more loving connection? Like, really orienting towards that and moving forward. And I'm so happy to hear that working with the plants, like, brought that to you.
Mm.
And I often see a lot of people who come to the plants after doing a similar path to you. I know so many people who were in AA for like, yeah, a decade. And they reach the same point when they're like, I got so much from it. And there was just like this like somatic embodied experience of just like violence, you know, trauma, whatever you want to call it, distortion that can't be worked out without some like serious big guns that need to be brought in. And your nervous system needs that. Okay, I would like to talk to something that you spoke about earlier, which is a theme that I do see. It's an uncomfortable theme. I see it a lot with women. I also see it with men, but in particular, speaking to like your experience of, you know, being raised by a feminist scholar who's writing about motherhood, and then the like complete inverse of like actually not showing up as a mother in the way that the most basic way that a mother needs to in terms of protecting her child. And you wrote something recently on Instagram that was so good in terms of like your stance around the right for sexual assault survivors to not end up in the sex industry and to not have to go down that path as well. And then getting shit for it from like, quote, I'm saying this in air quote, from feminists who are like, you're being anti-woman, you're being anti-sex worker rights. And you're like, what about my right to not be trafficked? Like, there's a bigger conversation here. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear any of your thoughts about that.
Yes, I have so many thoughts about this. Okay, I'll first just start with the piece about my mother. So I have been, unpacking this shit for fucking ever and going deeper and deeper and deeper. And like, I still have a therapist who I see every week, who I've seen for like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And, in the last year and a bit, we've been unpacking a lot of stuff about my mother. And my therapist actually referred to my mother as the final boss. And so I'm like, yeah, I think so. And like, look, all the men in my family are fucked. Like my grandfather and my father and that lineage of patriarchal incest is completely fucked. And I have lots to say about it, and I have said lots about it, and I will continue to say things about it. But also, there is a dynamic that happens in incestuous, patriarchal incestuous families in which the mother is also there and is also witnessing it and has a responsibility to do her best to take the child out of the abusive situation. And she doesn't often. And what is going on with this? And of course, there are situations where the mother is being physically abused, the mother has no money, and she is, dependent financially on the father. The mother doesn't have citizenship, right? Like there's all sorts of situations in which greater power structures are forcing the hand of that mother. So there could be mothers who are doing their absolute best to protect the child, and a larger culture is not allowing them to leave with the child, right? So I understand that those situations exist, in which, the mother's role in protecting the child, she's doing the best that she can, but other people are preventing her from protecting her child. However, there are lots and lots of situations in which the mother is not being physically abused. The mother is middle class. She has access to money. She has a career. And she absolutely could remove the child. It would cost her something, definitely. It would cost her something to have to take her children and become a single mother. That would be really hard financially. It would affect her career. And none of these things are fair, right? However, it's her fucking responsibility to do so. And one of the things that I came into the realization about, which is really crazy, okay, so I just want to spell this out a little bit. In Canada, where I live, there was a recent scandal where a very famous writer named Alice Munro, who's, Canada is small, so we like really big up our writers. Um, Alice Munro, she's a famous short story writer, literary like icon in Canada, and she passed away and just like last year or something. And her daughter wrote an article in the Toronto Star talking about how she was sexually abused by her stepfather, Alice Munro's husband, and how she disclosed about this when she was an adult, and her mother basically attacked her for it and continued to stay with the man like for the rest of her life and like basically just disowned her daughter. And what I was thinking about with this, because Alice Munro is also a famous feminist, and so is my mother. And I was thinking about how, there's this generation of boomer women who grew up under really intense patriarchy, who grew up and who became adults at a time when they like legally weren't even allowed to have a bank account, right? So they were experiencing like really intense sexism. And they were trying to break into the workforce and have careers. And this was like the first generation where they were allowed to do that, right? So there's all these women who were writers, artists, academics, who were doing various like big time careers. And they were like, making money and like making a name for themselves and following their dreams, things that had been really barred from women, even of their mother's generation, right? Many of these women are doing this for the first time in their family line, but they're doing it with partners who are also carrying all sorts of fucked up baggage and sexism and misogyny and patriarchy, and histories of incest. And they themselves also have a totally unprocessed trauma history because all the sexual abuse that was totally rampant inside and outside of the family it was not dealt with or faced or transformed in any way. And so, what is kind of happening here, and I just want to say it because it's fucking really disturbing, but I think that these women sacrificed their daughters and allowed their daughters to take the brunt of the sexual violence inside the patriarchal home and allowed that to happen so that they could have their careers, so that they could actually continue to follow their professional dreams. And this is the level of betrayal because I'm like, if my mother had taken me out of the home, she would never have been able to have the kind of superstar academic career that she has because she would be a mother, a single mother of three kids, and that would be super, super hard, right? So she, on some level, made a choice. And I think that there's some calculation in that that is not being honestly talked about. And I think that the role of women in incestuous families who allow this to continue, we need to take it seriously and we need to ask, like, why are they allowing it to? Is it just because they are being victimized and because of their trauma? And or is there also a situation in which they get material benefits from sacrificing their daughters in this way, right? And so I want to really point that out. And I want to also point out that we have an entire generation of women producing feminist scholarship who may actually have dynamics like this going on in their families, right? And this is never public knowledge. And so we don't actually know, like the feminist theory that we're consuming, the political ideas that are coming out of this generation, like how much of it is actually built on the silence of sexually abused girls, right? Like how is our entire fucking feminist discourse literally the result of a generation of daughters putting up with the sexual advances of their family members? And like I would be so curious to find out because when I heard what Alice Munro said to her daughter, I was shocked because I could not imagine a situation in which a mother was actually using feminism to justify silencing her daughter speaking about sexual abuse. But that's what my mother did to me. Like when I talked about what happened in my family, like specifically another element of it that I didn't get into, but it's about my father and my father's role in all of this, and my belief that my father is exactly like his father, obviously. My mother like threatened to sue me for writing about this, and also told me that it was the most like anti-feminist mother blaming rhetoric she had ever heard in her life, right? So she's literally weaponizing feminism to silence me from talking about patriarchal incest. So we got some fucking dysfunctional stuff going on in feminism that we need to look at. And we need to actually look at power. And we need to understand that children are human beings and they have rights. They are not just like a secondary consideration after women, right? Women's liberation and children's liberation must be equally important. And in fact, a child has less power than an adult woman, and it is her responsibility to take care of that child and make sure that the child is safe. So that's that. Now I'll get into the sex work stuff. This is very, very controversial, and it's one of the things that people really love to start shit with me about. And it's funny because over the years of me being like this outspoken writer, as I've really come into my power and just been like, you know what, I'm actually not going to shut up about anything. I'm fucking tired of people telling me that I can't speak about certain things. It's ridiculous, right? So no, I'm going to say it, and people are going to get mad about it. And I think that this topic is one of the hot button ones that people get mad at me for. So I don't think I mentioned it, but I did sex work during those crazy years. I was a prostitute and in my early 20s. And so I don't think that only sex workers or former sex workers can speak on sex work because I actually believe that sex work is something that affects all women. And so I think that all women have the right to speak about the impact of, like, for example, the porn industry, what that has on them, because it does have an impact on them, regardless of whether or not they're sex workers themselves. But in my case, I literally am a former prostitute. So I'm just like, people who are like, center the voices of sex workers and like whatever, but don't want to listen to my opinion on this is just very hypocritical. Um, but regardless, we, okay, I'll start by saying this. The reason that the people who are jumping down my throat, who are being like, you're being anti-sex work, to be generous with them, what they're trying to do is they are trying to protect a very stigmatized population who experiences a huge amount of violence from further stigmatization and violence, right? We cannot be throwing sex workers under the bus. We cannot be stigmatizing women's sexuality or women getting paid for sex. We cannot be acting like that is like disgusting, gross, bad, because this is feeding into misogynist narratives about women's value and our sexuality, as if we are like tainted by having had sex for money or by having had a lot of sexual partners. Like, I reject this, I think, as a dehumanizing narrative about women. And I believe that sex workers deserve to be protected from violence and they don't need to be stigmatized for what they're doing. Um, I will always be like pro decriminalization and pro anything that empowers sex workers to be safe and to have their needs met. Absolutely. And I just think it's ridiculous that anyone could accuse me of trying to stigmatize sex workers or disempower sex workers because obviously not. My entire thing is protecting everyone from stigmatization and making sure that everyone has access to what they need. And I don't have weird baggage about sex. Like, it's fine. You can be a sex worker, but it's equally important that if people have the right, if they want to do sex work, to do it safely, that also people have the right not to do sex work if they don't want to. And this is the part that is glossed over in all of this, in this sort of like neoliberal, girl boss feminism where everything is just empowering and we're all just so sex positive. Like what we just sort of we take this like we take like labor stuff, like sex work is work. We talk about it through a labor lens, but we're like, okay, yes, but work is oppressive. Like it's not empowering. Like why do we say sex work is work and then we say like, oh, we can only talk about sex work in this really like positive way? No, we talk about work in negative ways all the time because work is often very oppressive. And that's what we do as socialists is that we critique our working conditions, right? And we want to make sure that people can have good work that actually is not degrading and dehumanizing and unsafe, right? And then also on top of that, I'm just sick and tired of people conflating sex work with other forms of labor as if they are interchangeable and the same. I'm like, tell me that when you have a dick in your pussy. I don't know. Like, it's not the same. It's literally not. It is work that involves the most vulnerable and personal aspects of who we are and our bodies. It is not comparable to being a factory worker. Like, those things are also, I'm not saying that that's easy. It definitely is dangerous and can be dehumanizing and all of those things as well. But it does not involve your sexuality or the most intimate parts of your body. And so, yes, we need to be able to talk about that. And then further, I was a sex worker and I have known, loved, and dated many sex workers over the course of my life. Okay. I know that many sex workers have a history of being sexually abused as children. And this is something that we need to talk about and acknowledge. So the thing is that when you are sexually abused as a child, you are being told directly that the only thing that matters about you is your body and your sexuality. You are being valued as a sexual object above being valued as a member of your family, above being valued as a child, you know? And so you are immediately being taught that your worth is your sexuality. Even if that is in a terrifying way, you're still being taught that message. And so many survivors go on to have compulsive sexuality where they constantly seek that same experience of being degraded and used sexually in order to process that, have some kind of power over it, or because they think that that's how they get love, you know? And so many survivors are caught in that, and sex work can definitely fall into that category. Additionally, on a very materialist level, like let's just acknowledge what we just said happens to survivors of childhood sexual abuse. We tend to go crazy. We tend to have very extreme emotions that are very hard to regulate, right? We tend to perhaps not be able to get out of bed for days, be scowling and looking extremely angry for no reason, having outbursts, being addicted, right? So if this is our reality, how easy do you think it is for us to hold down a normal job, right? I was not able to hold down a normal job. I tried. I was in like customer service work and like I was puking in the bathroom because I was fucking hungover and I was really struggling to be like polite and normal to customers because I was completely crazy and suffering and in huge amounts of pain. And so when I found out that I could work way, way, way less and get more money, this was obviously super accessible for me compared to other types of work. And I think that this is the reality for a lot of child sexual abuse survivors. We do not acknowledge that child sexual abuse is disabling. It is disabling. And therefore, we are often not able to do normal forms of work. Sex work can be a form of work that is accessible to child sexual abuse survivors and one that can feel natural and normal and familiar because of our sexual trauma. And so this could be true for many, many survivors who are doing sex work, like because it's the easiest work to access for them. And I think that a lot of like neoliberal girl boss feminisms would be like, okay, great. They found work that's accessible to them. Let's celebrate. And I'm like, no, because it is absolutely fundamental that survivors of childhood sexual abuse learn on a most fundamental and embodied level that their worth is not their bodies and their sexualities, that they are worth more than that. And so if they are in a situation where the only way that they can get paid is through their bodies and sexualities, of course that is reinforcing this really disempowering narrative that is literally about their trauma. And so, when I was a little bit older, and I started to get some recovery and I started to get some help, I managed to get onto disability in Ontario where I was living at the time. So I got money from the government for having PTSD. They gave me, I was still poor, but they gave me enough money to pay my rent and to just do like basic things like eat food, And like it's really hard even in Canada that is like way better than the United States. It's really hard to access disability for PTSD. You have to have, you have to really fight for it. You have to have like a good paper trail for it. It's not easy and most survivors don't get it. But what I can say is that is the thing that was a make or break for me. Like I needed time off of work. I needed time off of work. I could not have done everything that I was doing when I started to do all the hard work of getting into the trauma, getting the therapy, getting sober, figuring this all out. I could not have done that if I was working a shitty job, having like mood swings and barely able to contain myself, or if I was like letting men fuck me periodically, Like I needed a break from all of that. And also like sex work is super dangerous. Your chances of being sexually assaulted, of having bad experiences are high. And like my trauma cup is full. I don't want any more, thank you. And so at this stage of my life, like I remember because like I went to university and I got student loans and I was like, I'm never gonna pay these back. I have no fucking idea how I will ever pay these student loans back. And I remember once doing the math of trying to figure out how many men I would have to fuck to pay back my student loans because I was like, that's the only way I could ever imagine getting that much money, right? And just thinking about that is so disturbing to me that I would ever have to do that calculation. And then it turned out my life, my journey that I'm on, I managed to become a writer and to pay back my student loans with writer money. And I am very fucking proud of that. And I am very fucking proud that I was able to do that. And it matters, And I was talking about that with someone and they were like, well, it would have mattered too if you had done it through sex work. And I'm like, I mean, I think that if I would have done it through sex work, that would have been pretty fucking traumatic for me, actually, if I had to do that through sex work. And I'm actually really glad that I didn't have to. And I really hope that other people don't ever have to do that if that's not what they want to do. And I think it's okay for me to say that. And so the feminists, right? Like the feminists will often jump down my throat, and accuse me of being sex negative, anti-sex work, or like a swerf, for talking about this. And I think it's fucking insane. And I also think that many of these people who are saying this have literally never been prostitutes, right? And so they are the ones speaking over me, being like, oh no, you're speaking over sex workers, when I'm totally open about the fact that I used to be a prostitute, And so it just is so, it's such an unwillingness to, in good faith, listen to what I'm saying and just making the assumption that I'm just stigmatizing sex workers or I'm dehumanizing sex workers. Absolutely fucking not. Absolutely fucking not. And I think, yes, like, sure, I think that there is a way under which people can do sex work if they want to do sex work, and they definitely shouldn't be criminalized for it. But I think that if patriarchy is transformed, which it needs to be, if misogyny is transformed, which it needs to be, if incest is transformed, which it needs to be, then the porn industry and the sex work industries as they currently exist will not exist. Like they cannot exist because they are producing that misogyny, patriarchy, and incest, And so, like, yes, these are oppressive systems and we need to stand up against them while simultaneously refusing to dehumanize or throw away sex workers. It's not complicated. But yeah, one of the things I was talking about in that post particularly was the prevalence of incest-themed pornography, and how incest-themed pornography is like the most looked at pornography. And that even, I don't watch porn, but like I know people who do, and I've talked to lots of people who use porn. And basically, it's like if they go on there, it's like they're just looking on porn websites and it just like it just gives them incest porn. Like you don't even have to look for it. It's just giving you porn that is themed in this way that is like stepfather, stepdaughter, or whatever. And this is just so common. And it's more common and more easy to access than actual resources for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to recover, right? And so when incest survivors are actually trying to like learn about what happened to them and are like looking up incest online to try to find resources, they are more likely to find pornography that is fetishizing and sexualizing the worst thing that ever happened to them? This is a problem, and I don't think it should be a controversial thing for me to say that.
Oof. Thank you. Everything. that you just said is like the words right out of my mouth. And I feel like I'm still in a process of learning how to speak about all of this, about the feminism, about my feelings with the sex industry, about my feelings with pornography. Like I know that they're just like such, yeah, hot button topics that like people have such a difficult time speaking to it with the nuance that you just spoke to around the lines of like no part of me is going this evangelical Christian conservative like you're a sinful woman kind of,
No, what the fuck?
it's more around the lines of just like I mean, really what I would say is like a harm reduction perspective, which is how I see the world is like, listen, at the end of the day, people are going to do what they're going to do. They're going to do it with the sex industry. They're going to do it with drugs. They're going to do it with alcohol. They're going to do it with gambling. They're going to do whatever the fuck they're going to do, truly. And actually, at the end of the day, everyone has the right to do what they want to do. It's their life. It's their
Mhm.
responsibility. It's their path. And I did get really deep into a lot of harm reduction work when I was living in New York City. And that was a lot of street-based work that I was doing with addicts, with sex workers, with people who most people would look at and be like, you are the scum of the earth type vibes. Versus me just being like, all right, you know what? You're gonna go smoke a bunch of crack. I'm gonna give you like a clean crack pipe. Or you're gonna go shoot up. I'm gonna give you clean needles. Or you're gonna go and like find a John on the street corner because you have to buy you need money for dinner.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm going to give you condoms, right? Like I'm
Yes.
going to give you sanitary products to take care of yourself. And also, at some point, if you're ever in a position where you decide that this is not the life you want to live, what are the resources that you have?
Exactly.
And if you have people just telling you all the time, like you were saying, that girl boss feminism, like everything's empowering and sex is empowering and get your money, blah, blah, blah. If you have that narrative in your mind all the time, then when you say, actually, this is really fucking traumatizing. Actually, this is not normal to put my body on the line like this. Actually, this is dangerous. Actually, this is really violent. Actually, I need help. It's so rare that you're going to find anyone with any kind of nuanced perspective around it of like, you are not bad, you're not dirty, you're not shameful, you're not gross, you are a child of God. No matter what you have ever done, you are loved by God. And here are resources to support you and to hold the complexity of that experience.
Yes.
A lot of the time you see women end up going into like the most extreme shame spiral of like,
Yes.
oh my God, like I will never be able to like clean this off my record. I'll never be able to have healthy relationships. I'll never have a good relationship with sexuality, any of that. And it's because we have this extreme polarity of like the very, very strong evangelical Christian conservative vibes on the left or on the right, I would say. And then you have this like totally like black and white version of like get your money girl, do your thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's no in between of being able to
Yeah.
have conversations like this. And it is a big thing around feminism. I mean, I've done like a big unlearning with feminism, and there's aspects of it that I think are absolutely important and valuable and necessarily and beautiful. And I have deep gratitude and respect for certain parts of that lineage. And then as you were speaking, I was thinking back to this book that I read about like early feminism, like in kind of the late 1900s, or sorry, wait, late 1800s, early 1900s of like kind of first wave feminism. And the amount of rampant stories in that generation of like that first wave of women who were with men who were totally dysfunctional, a lot of the time alcoholics, a lot of the time like literally sexually abusing their own children, their daughters and their sons. And the mothers did nothing. And they were like, but I'm a feminist. And so while we see that in like the second wave, kind of the boomer generation that you were speaking to,
Yeah.
there's also much deeper roots that I didn't know about. Like I felt like I did a deep dive with second wave
Mm.
feminism for a while and seeing all of the whack shit and being like, that part is cool. That part is fucking horrible. Let's not do that. When I went even further back and saw more of the roots of things, I did see that there was a huge, huge lineage of that, of like what
Yeah.
exactly what you were speaking to, feminist women abandoning their daughters so that they could live whatever dream that they were trying to go after. And I don't want to say that to paint it all as bad because that's also not true. That's not correct and that's not my stance on things, but like the part you touched on of like the feminist scholarship that we are currently consuming in universities or in zines or like at, the the whatever like witchy girls night that you're going to, your new moon ceremony where you're doing weird shit. Like all of that, like what are the roots of that and what are the branches of that and what are the contortions of that as well, and how do we really come into right relationship of like what does it mean for women to have true sovereignty, true autonomy, true safety in our bodies, safety in our relationships? Like, what are we actually aligning towards? That's
Totally.
where I'm at for sure. Okay, I feel like it's good to wrap up. Do you have, I guess maybe my question is like, this is an intense conversation and I want to offer people some kind of hope, some kind of
Mhm.
like not maybe not resources, but like what is one thing that you have found in yourself of like this is something that I can remind myself every day, like that there's still light in my spirit. There's still joy in my laughter. There's still beauty in my bones. Like, what is something that you would offer to people?
I think one of the things I always want to say to people who are on their recovery journey is that I'm like, it's crazy when you're really traumatized because you cannot picture or imagine what it will be like when you become less traumatized. In the same way that somebody who can't see can't imagine what seeing is like, right? And so it can feel really daunting to put so much work towards a goal that is unclear to you. Like you're working towards hopefully something. You might have some sense of like maybe you want to be able to have more sensation, more closeness, but you don't actually know what that means or what it's actually like because you haven't experienced it, right? And the way that I see my recovery is this like constant moving and increasing of my capacity. And so what it is possible for me to experience now versus what it was possible for me to experience 5 years ago versus what it was possible for me to experience 10 years ago versus what it was possible for me to experience 15 years ago. Like it has this like shockingly increased at each stage, right? And I'm not done. I am not done. And like I think a lot of people feel daunted by this. They're like, "Oh no, like recovery is this whole journey of your whole life, like that sucks." But to me, I'm like, I actually get to do this. I actually get to become more of myself. And there are so many people who don't do this work, right? Like when I look at my parents, they just won't do this work. And so they're just stuck. Whereas for me, I'm constantly actually like shedding who I was and becoming someone else. And each time I do this, I'm like utterly floored by what is possible that I could not see before, that I actually did not know I couldn't even have missed it or have wanted it because I didn't even know what it was, right? And so like I really believe in recovery in terms of like becoming more of who you are, reclaiming your authenticity and agency, reclaiming your experience of your body and sexuality. And there's so many different tools for that journey. Like there are no right or wrong paths. You find your own path. But it's so, 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 so worth it, you know? And it's like facing what has happened to me. It's extremely painful. It's extremely hard. And it is me being in reality. And being in reality feels very good, even if what it is that you're looking at is very horrifying. There's a line that comes to mind from Andrea Gibson, who's a poet, and it's even when the truth is not hopeful, the telling of it is, right? And I think that sometimes this work can feel super like depressing, like dark, heavy, but it is this work that has created the openness, the pleasure, the joy, like, and um, maybe I'll just say a little about this because of the sex work conversation that we were just having. Like, there is no right or wrong way to have a life. There is no right or wrong way for you to reclaim your sexuality and your relationality, right? What that looks like for you as a sovereign and recovered person is not going to look the same necessarily as what that looks like for me, right? In my own journey, I am polyamorous. I am a highly sexual person and I choose to have sexual romantic relationships with multiple people. that is what recovered sexuality looks like for me. That is what recovered sexuality feels like for me. So the idea that people are like, oh, that I would necessarily be like stigmatizing sexuality or something because I said what I said about sex work is not true. Like for some people, the most recovered version of themselves might be a total slut, and that's fine. And for other people, the most recovered version of themselves might be monogamous, right? It's not about creating hierarchies about the right or wrong way to have a sexuality or to have relationships, but it's about getting really honest with yourself on your own journey about what you want and need, and also allowing that to change as you change, right? And I can say that right now in my life, like I still have things that I definitely struggle with and I'm working on, but the amount of pleasure, is crazy. And I am currently like my next project that I want to work on. I'm trying to carve out enough space in my life to write this book. And it's going to be called The Ontology of Pussy. And it's literally like a sexual pleasure memoir, like coming out of like an incest survivor trauma memoir, like it's culminating in this like experience of like really fucking like safe, trustworthy, gorgeous, pleasurable, relational, and sexual experiences in my life in my late 30s, and like how hard I worked for that, but like how fucking worth it is to have arrived here. And so I think that's a positive note to end on. Is just that like we don't do this work for no reason. We do it because like the payoff is really fucking good.
Yeah, thank you so much for all that. And two things that I'll say briefly. Yeah, when it comes to what it's gonna feel like to feel good in your body and safe in your body is totally different for everyone. And there's no way to say, I'm in a much more like monogamous place in my life, but I was also very exploratory with a lot of different relationship dynamics for a long time. And whatever people find that feels genuinely safe and protective and supportive for them, do that. And if in 5 years that changes, then you do something else. And if 6 months that changes, you do something else. Like and having any kind of like goal, intention, dogma, rules around any of this, like certainly doesn't necessarily serve you. Maybe it'll offer some structure at some point in time, but like giving ourselves back the freedom of understanding, like, it's my life. It's my life. Like I can do what works for me in this moment in time. And I have the autonomy to do something different in 2 months, in 2 years, in 20 years, whatever that may be. And then, yeah, the other part of it of like, it absolutely is possible to get to a point with your body where sex feels good, where it feels safe, where it feels pleasurable, where you don't feel numb, where you don't shut down, where you don't have flashbacks, where you don't like totally dissociate. It's a slow process. It takes a long time. It takes trusting partners. It takes
Mhm.
emotional safety. It takes true vulnerability and honesty. And it's hard and it's beautiful and it only gets better. Like, I'm not currently partnered. That was a big grief thing that I had to go through after
Mm,
my last relationship where I was like, wait, I finally got to the point where sex was like good. What am I gonna
mm,
do? In my next relationship, I have to start all over. And I was like, no,
mhm.
I get to start from where I'm at. Probably
Exactly.
even more so because I'm going to have this period where I'm alone and I get to know my body even more. And so,
Mm,
whether you're partnered, whether you're single at this moment in time, like your body is your garden, your body is your temple, your body is yours, truly, at the end of the day. And life is long and life is beautiful.
mm.
And exactly what you said, like we get to do this. We don't have to. We really get to, and it's a gift if we choose to take it that way. Awesome. Well, how can people find you and get connected to you and all of your amazing work?
Thank you. Yes, so clementinemorrigan.com is my website and also my Substack. So you can like put in your email and you'll receive I put a bunch of writing on there so you can receive essays in your inbox. And then on Instagram, I'm Clementine Morrigan as well. And that's where I post all my little text squares with my short form writing. And then my podcast, Fucking Canceled, you can find at fuckingcanceled.com. I also sell lots of zines. I have a lot of different zines. Right now, my physical zines are on pause because I'm taking a little break so that I can focus on some other things in my career. But you can still find digital copies of all of them, which you just click on shop on the clementinemorgan.com website and you can see the zines. I think that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been a wild ride, super beautiful conversation. Thank you for all of the beautiful wisdom and medicine that you have shared. Thank you for the path that you have walked. And thank you for the immense example of bravery and courage that you walk through the world with. As someone who's been following your work for a long time, it is just like consistently more and more inspiring that you open the door for other people to really be their true selves because you are your truest self all the time, very loudly and in public, which is really, really hard to do. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for seeing me. I feel like yeah, in coming from a history of so much repression, you know, like claiming that authenticity, like now that I've passed that threshold, it's like I can't put it back in the box, you know. I'm not gonna give that up for anybody. So the haters are gonna hate and I'm just gonna keep doing me. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's been really, really great.
Thank you.